Just today, I was reading a detailed piece by Jagannath Panda, who is a writer at The Diplomat, and he is the head of the Stockholm Center for South Asian and Indo-Pacific Affairs. And he penned a detailed piece, and its headline is "The EU's Response to Pahalgam, a Missed Opportunity." And he's talking about the role of the EU as far as the Pahalgam incident is concerned, and their diplomatic support for India, which is, in other words, is making a complaint that they did not respond to our call up to our expectations. So if there were some explicit evidence against Pakistan existed, India's own allies like European Union and other major powers would not have stepped back. Don't you think so? It's time for New Delhi introspects why, despite its economic clout and military might, the world is not buying their story? That's my conclusion.
No, I think this is an important consideration. Yeah, this is an important consideration for India moving forward. Only two entities, Taiwan and Israel, were fully behind India, so to speak, in this conflict. I mean, the problem for India, quite frankly, is that it wants the world to see these types of crises and conflicts as something that is completely rooted around the issue of terrorism and cross-border terrorism. But the issue is that when you have these conflicts and the significant levels of escalation, what the international community is going to be most concerned about is stability and indeed nuclear escalation risks. So in that sense, it's not surprising that most countries around the world, including most of India's closest partners, Russia, the US, others, were most focused about de-escalation, not most focused about on this issue of terrorism and stepping back and suggesting that India should do whatever it pleases to address this terrorism concern. It's only natural and only understandable that the international community would respond that way. So I would argue this in closing: while much of the world, including the US, sympathizes with India's concerns about terrorism, when it all comes down to it, when you have an attack and then India stages airstrikes in Pakistan, it's only natural that the world is going to be most focused on the risk of an escalation, given that you have two nuclear-armed nations. It's very unusual, highly unusual, for two nuclear adversaries to engage in force against each other. So it's, again, only natural that the international community would be most focused on the issue of nuclear escalation risk, which is not the way India wants the world to see things, but that's basically how it's going to remain.
So, Michael, what future do you see of the Indus Water Treaty? Because that is a major concern, especially for the public in Pakistan.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, one of the biggest concerns post-conflict is what becomes of the Indus Waters Treaty. I don't need to tell you and your audience what the long-term implications could be for Pakistan and its water security. I do not think that India will be inclined to return to the treaty. My sense is that India, for quite some time, had been looking for an opportunity to back away from it. So I don't think it would want to come back to it. It thinks the treaty is unfair and that it allocates, 80% of the Indus Basin waters to Pakistan. So I don't, and given that India's condition for returning to it is basically comes back to the terrorism issue, that Pakistan has to stop sponsoring terrorists, sheltering terrorists. This is a point that, of course, Pakistan contests, that it does not sponsor or shelter terrorists. So unfortunately, and I don't think that the international community can be counted on to pressure India to come back into the treaty. The World Bank is, in theory, a player, and that, of course, as you know, it mediated the treaty and it co-signed to it. But I think that the World Bank's options are limited. The thing I would say here is that what Pakistan might need to do, and its delegation in Washington this week perhaps would want to focus on this, is try to educate the international community about the context. I think many people in Washington and elsewhere don't understand Pakistan's water situation and how significant its water insecurity is, even in the best of times. And when you think about climate change effects and how that could make things worse, the prospect of India being in a position to prevent water from flowing into Pakistan down the road, it's something that could have significant risks for Pakistan. And so if the world is made to understand that more, perhaps then there'd be more momentum and more efforts in the international community to try to focus on this issue more.
One last thing, Michael. What would be your single most important recommendation for policymakers in both countries moving forward?
I mean, it's not my role to play the role of policy advisor, but I guess that the best I could say is try to ensure that some modicum of dialogue remains open. I mean, I think we saw in this last crisis how dangerous things got, and I and others worry that the next conflict could be
Exactly.
even more escalatory than this previous one. And again, given that both countries have nuclear weapons, you really worry about moving too high up the escalation ladder. To the extent that you have some level of dialogue, it could try to keep tensions lower. The fact that the DGMO hotline remains open and used, that's critical. I hope that continues. I'm sure it will. But all I could say is that hoping that both sides, particularly the Indian side, because they've been more resistant to the idea of dialogue, will be receptive to the idea of keeping some level of some channel open for
Very sane.
talks.
So, Michael, do you think that this ceasefire will remain intact?
I think it should. It certainly is very fragile. I think it should. I don't think either side has an interest in breaking it. I mean, that would certainly raise the ire of the Trump administration, which I don't think either side wants right now. And you know, India's government has been maybe a bit more detailed in its thinking on this. It's been, I think, a bit more. It has not been willing to call it a ceasefire. It said it's a pause. But Modi has essentially said that. Not that India would be inclined to start resuming military strikes on Pakistan, but that if India is hit by an attack, then it would respond and very quickly and with a lot of muscle. Pakistan, of course, has been calling for dialogue. It's been calling for peace in the region and so on. So I think that, I hope I'm not wrong, I do think that the ceasefire should be able to hold, but I think the bigger and more concerning question is what becomes of the India-Pakistan relationship, which I would argue is tenser now than it has been in quite some time. And unlike in the past, when you see a pattern of a really
Yeah.
serious crisis or a conflict between the two, leading to a situation where the two sides actually are able to relax tensions, after the 2019 crisis, 2 years after that, you had the LOC truce. But I'd argue that in this case, things are a lot different, and there's good reason to believe that this relationship will remain ice cold for quite some time.
Exactly. You were just talking about the public pressure on the Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of the India. But on the same time, I was just talking about the role played by the media on both sides. I'm sure, being an expert in South Asian affairs, you must have seen the role of the Indian media in particular. Quite a few sane voices in India. They were spreading fake news, including Barkha Dutt and others. And when I talk about their local media in Hindi language, unbelievable. They were just, a classical example of warmongering, and they were just airing some fake news